Thank you so much for having this. I think it's great that voters get to hear from us and get to hear on issues. I've certainly watched these videos before to decide. I think this election is really historic for Illinois, not just for the immediate future of Illinois, but for long-term, whether or not we let kind of the status quo in Springfield continue or if we start something new. And that's why I jumped into this. My family came to Illinois 150 years ago from Indiana and Kentucky and Missouri, kind of all together, because Illinois had the opportunities that they wanted. It had better farm ground, and it had the promise that if they worked hard, they could succeed. And that's what they did, and that's why I'm here, and this is home. But we don't see Illinois offering those same opportunities now. People aren't coming to Illinois. In fact, it's the opposite. People are leaving in record numbers, and it's not surprising to see why. We have the highest property taxes, we have the worst funded schools, we have some of the highest unemployment, some of which is in my home county of Montgomery County, and we have the worst credit rating. And so we're not offering the kind of state that people would want to come to anymore. And that's exactly why a year ago, I decided to jump into this race, because I wouldn't stand for the same status quo that we've seen in Illinois over the past 40 years of not looking towards the future, but instead kind of managing crisis to crisis, and not looking towards how do we protect Illinois for future generations, and how do we promote business, how do we promote jobs and make this a place people want to come to. So I have three priorities. One is, like I said, Montgomery County has some of the highest unemployment. We have to make Illinois a place where business owners want to start businesses, where we can keep the businesses that we have and create jobs and opportunities. The second one is education. I grew up in a really small public school. My dad was a school teacher. He served on the school board, and we saw uniquely the challenges that small school districts face.
Which district?
Vernon School District. Yeah. And we saw firsthand how small schools who don't get funded well, when the school leaves, the community crumbles. And we have to make sure that students, no matter where they're from, no matter which zip code they live in, gets the same great opportunities to move on and succeed in whatever they aspire to do. And then the third one, the first political memory I have, actually, kind of a friend of a friend. My family is not political at all, but I got involved in walking for a parade for Governor Ryan when I was maybe too small for them to even have a shirt to fit me. And I remember afterwards, when he was elected, that I felt really involved in getting him elected. And I think everyone should get excited by civic engagement and being a part of it. But I saw that that was kind of crumbling. After he went to prison, I was heartbroken. Then I saw another governor go. Some of my formative memories of people who represented me in office were letdowns. I saw a president go through the impeachment process. And I think that we have to change the culture of government in order for people to be involved, to get involved, and to think that it's possible to make changes in government. And so that's not only something that we do through talking about changing government and through kind of the way we interact with one another in Springfield, but we can do things legislatively or through voter initiatives, like putting term limits on the ballot. I have a bill for leadership term limits. We gotta cycle people through, create new ideas, spark new conversations, and bring new agendas to the table. So term limits, I'm a huge proponent of redistricting reform, and we just have to change the way that we do politics in Springfield so that more people want to be involved, and really so we can renew the public's trust in Illinois government. I think that's really one of the reasons that people aren't excited to come to Illinois to begin with. So those three things, I think overall, the message is that we cannot keep sending the same kind of status quo people to Springfield and expecting to see different outcomes. So that's why I jumped in, thought I couldn't wait any longer and hope that Illinois would be the place I wanted to live in 40 years if I didn't do something about it now. So that's why I'm running again. It's been an absolute privilege over the past year, but there's still a lot to do. I look forward to your questions.
You've come to Springfield at a time where parties are basically at a deadlock.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing's getting done because everyone's on one side or the other.
Mm-hmm.
How are you committed to working across the aisle? How can this deadlock be resolved?
I think it has to be through conversation and compromise. Every single one of us in the General Assembly represents Democrats, Republicans, Independents, and people who don't want to be involved in the political process because they're tired of it. And I think that we have to have that perspective. More practically, I'm a member of the Future Caucus, which is a new group of younger elected representatives who we've decided that our problems are bigger than any one party can fix. And it's taken us years and years to get into this mess. It's going to take years to get out of it, but we have to work collaboratively and really face the reality that this is going to take people from all parts of the state and all parties in the state to come together and fix it. So that's a group I'm excited to be a part of. I think it has a lot of potential. It's chaired by Will Guzzardi and Tom Demmer, so two sides right there coming together to work together. I think it holds a lot of promise and something that the leadership, I think, could take and use as a good model.
You know, there's, I think, a real perception in the public that people in the House especially are either beholden to the Speaker or to the Governor. Is that accurate?
I don't think so.
Wow.
So there are a lot of relationships. We all get along really well, kind of the rank and file, and we're able to talk about pieces of legislation that are good or bad. I think that the holdup is really in the leadership. It's taken so many years to get to the point where the power is so concentrated, whether it's in the leadership in the House, the leadership in the Senate, or in the administration, that sometimes our voices get quieted, but also we can have these really robust discussions about policies, but then every single bill has to go through the Speaker's hand to even get put on the floor for a vote. And I think that's where the holdup is, and that's where, you know, you have to have these relationships with the Speaker to get your bill called, and that's not how it should work. It should be a collaborative effort where you can work across party lines. And without...
We've got two very high-profile primaries right now involving legislators across party lines.
Yeah, I mean...
Duncan and Sam McCann, what kind of message does that send about Springfield?
I think it sends the message that my leadership term limit bill should pass through the House and the Senate and should be law. We need to have this open exchange of ideas. We need to have people who are able to work across party lines. We need to have a system in government where you feel comfortable representing your district. And I think a lot of us do.
What's your leadership term limit, Bill? How many years for what?
I think it's 8.
Are you the sole sponsor?
Right now, yeah.
And do you favor term limits for all representatives or just in leadership?
I think that leadership term limits are a good place to start because they don't require a constitutional amendment, so it's something that we can do now. I think that we should put blanket term limits on the ballot, let voters decide. I think that's the most pragmatic way to get it through. It would be hard, I think, to get a majority of elected officials to vote themselves out of a job, even if it's the right thing to do. I think the quickest way would be through a ballot initiative.
Just about term limits, do you have any mentors in the House who you look to for advice?
There are a few who've really kind of taken me under their wing because we have similar districts. Adam Brown sits next to me, and so he came into the House at a young age, and so he understands the unique challenges that you face being a younger elected official. C.D. Davidsmeyer is another one who we share a border of our district, so we share a county. So that's good to be able to talk about. We have a similar constituency. And Noreen Hammond has been really helpful as well. She has the institutional knowledge, even though she hasn't been a legislator as long, because she was there previously working in the House.
I know there have been a couple of votes on this arbitration thing, which is a big deal, particularly in the 50th, which is not your territory.
But contiguous, yeah.
You voted present once, and you voted against it this last time.
Correct.
Why the difference in, I know, just as a representative of the people, and
right.
You probably got many calls, explain why the present vote and then why you changed this time.
Sure. So under 1229, I heard from a lot of constituents on both sides of the issue. I thought that it was not the legislature's role to get in the middle of the arbitration, in the middle of negotiations with the arbitration bill. But I talked with a lot of constituents who said, I understand that you think it's a bad bill. I said, I'm in favor of a fair contract. I want you to continue negotiating. I don't think this is the right way to do it. And they said, Avery, if you cannot vote with us, please show us that you want a fair contract and don't vote against us. And I said, okay, I can do that. And then afterwards, those same people were saying, please don't vote present on the next one. And so you can't make everybody happy in this business. So 580 came up, and when I was speaking with constituents about 1229, they said, we don't want to strike and we don't want to lock out, which was accomplished through the indefinite tolling agreement that was signed between the administration and the union. So this 580 essentially went against the agreement that the administration had with AFSCME, and I don't think that's right. And I don't think that that's, again, the place of the legislature. And so I said, this is a bad bill. I told my constituents that called me, I said, I'm voting no, or I did vote no if they called me afterwards. And I've called most of them back. I've been going through the list. I would say it's about half and half. Half of them are not going to agree with me, and that's okay. But they deserve a representative who's going to let them know why they voted the way they voted. And the other half have said, I agree with you. After we talk it out, I agree with you, or I really respect you for calling. Thanks for calling. I'll continue to stay in touch with you on issues. And so I think that's, whether you agree or disagree, I think that it's really good to have those discussions, and they understand.
With all the state of pleasure, Senator McCann has said like 95 to 99% of his people wanted him to vote for the override of 1229. What percentage are you getting?
So I don't remember exactly the 1229 numbers, but for this past one, I heard from about 20 people total, and it was, yeah.
So how's that play out with the current status of negotiation with the governor referring it to the Labor Relations Board and really wanting to declare an impasse?
I think that we'll have to see what the Labor Relations Board says. I think that the legislature getting involved in this with 1229 or with 580 has stalled negotiations. I think we just need to let them negotiate a fair contract. They've negotiated a fair contract with 17 other unions. Other governors have gone this long or longer. Sometimes it takes some time. Yeah, sometimes it takes some time to get something right. I don't know if it was right to go to the Labor Relations Board or not, but I think that's why the board's there. And if it's not right, then they'll force them back to the negotiation table, which is, I think, where they need to be anyway. I think if we had a budget, this would be over. And I think if we had a contract, maybe the budget would be somewhere else too. So I think that those two items are conflicting as well.
That's an interesting point about the budget. We're 8 months in.
Right.
We didn't have a budget when you were appointed.
Correct.
So
I was appointed on budget day last year.
yeah. So, some people, Governor Edgar has been out there saying that, he for one, Governor Thompson jumped in, said that, they wish that the governor would put aside some of these pieces of the turnaround agenda, pass the budget, and then go back to work on those. What's your view of, their position? Do you agree with them? And if not, why?
I think we've had 12 years of unbalanced budgets, and to say that we can continue down that road and that we should pass a budget that is an empty promise and something we can't pay for is not only unfair to every Illinoisan, I think it's not doing our job. We have the constitutional requirement to pass a balanced budget. With that being said, I think if there was a balanced budget proposed, I don't see any reason why we shouldn't go for it. But we need to show Illinoisans that we're willing to do government differently, which I think is the impetus of the turnaround agenda to begin with. Show people that we're willing to change the way Illinois does government. So I think we do have to show people that we're willing to make some reforms. Now, whether that's specifically the governor's turnaround agenda or some other push, I think that has to happen at the same time or alongside with. We have to start that discussion too.
Do you support the idea of letting the governor have the authority to just cut $3.5 billion?
I think the best case solution is for the legislature to do that. I think that's our responsibility, is to pass a balanced budget. Clearly, these are dire financial times. I don't think anyone wants to see sweeps again, but some cuts are going to have to be made.
What's your understanding of the budget hole at the end of 2016, taking into consideration bills that aren't even in the queue because but there's no appropriation to pay for them?
Right.
They may be in the queue, but how do you pay for them? What's your estimate of that size?
So my estimate is that will be $6 billion over what we're taking in. So I've heard 4 to 6. I think that's think we're probably closer to the 6 at this point, so 38 billion.
Okay, we lost $5 billion from the income tax going away.
Correct.
We had a $6 billion backlog at the time.
Mhm.
And we don't have an appropriation for bills this year, but we were paying 90% of the.
Mhm.
So what, do you wanna review that number for me? Where do you get $6 billion?
Well, what I heard is that we're spending at $4 to $6 billion more than what we're taking in.
How long can collateral damage go on? I mean, the governor said he wanted to shake up Illinois and he wants collective bargaining reform and these other things.
Mm-hmm.
He has an overwhelmingly Democratic legislature,
Mhm.
not veto-proof really with Ken Duncan and others.
Right.
So are you willing to let this go on for another year, 2, or 3, because it looks like it might?
I think it's gone on entirely too long.
How do you stop it?
Yeah, that's the trick. We have to do something, whether it's university funding or it's my guess is that we'll have some kind of stopgap funding after the primary's over.
Stopgap?
Some kind of making up the 10% that we're not already spending, but clearly the leadership needs to sit down and negotiate, and that's what I get to do every day. Is I get to go and talk to people in the district, and I get to tell the stories of whether it's the vendor who is owed $125,000 for, they supply auto parts to the IDOT shed. Whether it's that story or it's the story of someone who their company is closing down next week, or not next week, in a couple months. Talked to them last week, and I'm saying, hey, these jobs are moving to Indiana in that case. Or if it's saying, hey, these students who need MAP grant funding, they're not going to be able to pay for their college if we don't do something. And so it's constantly putting pressure on leadership to sit down and negotiate and figure it out.
The governor recently gave, at this time at least, like $900,000 to the Republican Party. The Republican Party has spent like $250,000 on you so far.
Mhm.
Can you vote against the governor on any of these issues, or will you have to get approval? Will you have to be? What could you vote that he doesn't want? If he doesn't get a turnaround agenda piece and he doesn't want something overridden or some spending to go on, can you vote against him? And has that happened yet?
Yeah, it can, and it has.
Or would you vote against him?
So I guess here specifically in Springfield, I voted to keep the State Museum open. It's something that a lot of my school students said, hey, we want to go. And quite frankly, I thought it needs to stay open, especially now that we're paying people to be there anyway. So yeah, right here close to home. And I think that shows when you're able to step out, and then now the governor's come back with an amendatory veto and said, okay, we can compromise on this and find a way. Hopefully that continues with Senator Menard's new bill.
So Avery, if you were, on a moral and ethical basis, if you were to take those piles of bills and pit the ones where the state has already received the service, let's say it's CWLP or
Right.
some water district in southern Illinois that's
Mhm.
feeding a historic site, what's the top priority? Is it that collateral damage, or is it education funding at the level that the governor suggested?
Yeah,
Who should get the first dollar?
I don't envy the comptroller's job, but I think that we have to pay our bills. I mean, I don't think that's the issue right now, that we can't prioritize one over another. We have to just pass an overall budget, not only for this year, but for what we haven't funded for last year.
And should that supersede education funding?
Education funding should be our number one priority, but we've also promised all of these vendors. So it's a good question.
One of the keys of the turnaround is, well, the governor continues to want, at least as part of the package, he says maybe not everything, local units of government and school districts, the ability not to pay prevailing wage if they don't want, not to collectively bargain with their employees if they don't want. Do you have an opinion on those two issues?
I think that people providing a service need to make a good wage, especially for high-skilled workers. With that being said, when we are cutting funding to local governments, or if the more mandates we place on them, or if we're talking about a property tax freeze, we have to make sure that we're giving them the flexibility to spend their money appropriately and responsibly for the taxpayers. So I think that there could be some negotiation room, some compromise there, but I think that absolutely those who perform services should get paid a fair wage.
some
Right.
compromise, does that mean that they don't have to pay prevailing wage or collectively bargain if they don't want?
No, I
Would
think
that be your
I think that it
suggestion?
means that there could be some bipartisan compromise on how we allow local governments or schools to spend their money. I don't know if it's necessarily exactly what's in the governor's turnaround agenda.
I'm not sure what you mean by that.
Right. So I think that
Flexibility and
Third way.
so I think that if we're going to find compromise in the governor's turnaround agenda, I don't know if prevailing wage is the number one where we find compromise. I think if we're looking at a property tax freeze, we need to look at education funding reform. I think that could be a number one. But I don't know if prevailing wage needs to be tied to the property tax freeze necessarily.
collective bargaining freedom for the local governments to decide on that.
Yeah, I support collective bargaining rights.
So you wouldn't say local government should be able to deny them.
I think it depends on the proposal. If you're looking at what Chicago's been allowed to decide, I think that we'll have to see specific language.
So do you have an example from your district where prevailing wage has either stopped or delayed a project because of costs that the local unit of government didn't want to pay?
Yes, there's a school in Taylorville. I don't know if that they were delayed specifically, but when I was touring the new school, they were talking about how much money they would have saved had they not paid prevailing wage necessarily. But then I talked to the superintendent and he said, but we want to pay them a fair wage anyway, so we think we would have. So that's kind of the balance that we're setting. Would it have saved them money, but would they have chosen that to begin with? So it would have saved them money. He says they would have paid prevailing wage anyway. But I don't know that it was necessarily delayed.
Any numbers tossed around with that?
There were. I think that they said they could have built another, it was the cost of a classroom that they saved.
That just seems like in the scope of things, 11 billion,
Mhm.
that prevailing wage and, I realize property tax freeze and on, but that just seems like chump change.
I think, yeah, we're facing these big gaps, and how do we find the right way to cut or raise revenue or whatever the case may be to balance the budget. And like the comptroller treasurer combination bill, which was I think the first bill that I hopped on in the legislature, saves $12 million. And so you see that and you say it's not very much. But then if you keep finding these places where you can save $12 million, that's $12 million less that we would have to raise in revenue to balance the budget. So I think anywhere where there's a potential cost savings we need to talk about. Whether or not that's the answer, I think is a different discussion.
I guess thinking through that, and then I'll get off, but
Sure.
thinking through that, so all of a sudden Taylorville decides, no, we're not gonna pay prevailing wage.
Mhm.
And we're not gonna do that out of the goodness of our heart.
Mhm.
So that means lower wages for those families.
Right.
With children in school.
Right.
Less ability to do whatever, to run out to McDonald's or whatever. So
Right.
those kind of ripple things.
It certainly
and
has an impact on the economy one way or another.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I don't know. I mean, that just doesn't seem like it gets us to the point where we're welcoming new businesses.
Yeah, I don't think that anything is the magic, the magic answer.
So you mentioned 12 years of unbalanced budgets.
Mhm.
We know there's several $billion backlog of
Yes.
bills and several billion that we probably don't even know about.
Mm-hmm.
As a legislator, you would have to take the knife and cut some things.
Right.
Where do you see those opportunities and how much money would it represent?
Mm-hmm. So I guess I mentioned earlier the comptroller treasurer. That's again, it's $12 million. It's pennies on the dollar of what we need to find in savings. But I think we have 118 members of the General Assembly who can look for things like this. I also think we have to start with us. I don't think that the General Assembly was ever intended as a way to make a career. So I'm not taking a pension, and I think we should do away, phase out legislative pensions as a way to say we're serious about saving the state money, we're serious about this being a service, and we're serious about saving some taxpayer dollars. And then I think we also, I've looked at a few studies. If we looked at Medicaid spending, some studies have shown it could save hundreds of millions of dollars. And again, we have these huge gaps to fill, but I think that's a really good start.
Before we get off budget topics, can you double back on the power for the governor to act on an emergency
Sure.
basis? My understanding is I think Leader Redonio has started a bill to that effect.
Yes.
If that bill made it to the House, how would you vote?
I think it depends on how we're looking on a budget. So I think if Speaker Madigan decides that the second option laid out in the budget address is what he wants to take and send a budget and say, do with it what you want, then that would be the role that we have to take, because we can't have a budget that's out of balance and have it be signed without the power to make it balanced. But my hope, and I think the best option, is to sit down, negotiate, and find a balanced budget without having to use that.
That will probably involve revenue. I mean, the comptroller has said,
Right.
if we just did sales tax now, it'd have the individual have to go to 7 to 8, not just 5.
Right.
What revenue are you open to balance that budget?
I think that it's irresponsible to ask the taxpayers for more money if we're not willing to show that we're changing the way we spend money. So I think that the revenue discussion is not one that we have until we talk about how we're going to spend it.
Which gets you off the hook from saying that you would be for any kind.
Right. Well, I think that it says that's not our starting point.
I know, but
So
you
you're
prefer,
saying you put something forward with cuts and a plan that like you go to the taxpayers and say, we would need this amount, but here's what we have cut.
I think we have to show them that we're willing to change the way we're doing government. So whether that's some of the governor's turnaround agenda or it's some other reforms, and we're saying here's how we're tightening up our belt, before you could ever ask taxpayers to give more out of their paycheck to fix the problems that have been created here for years and years.
in your primary, you're facing, I guess, well, we can talk about conservative credentials anyway. I assume all
Right.
three of you claim conservative credentials. Why don't you just explain where you are on like social issue things, abortion, guns,
Sure.
stuff?
I am adamantly and unapologetically pro-life.
Any exceptions?
I think that the pro-life movement shouldn't get into I think we create too much of an issue with
So
exceptions.
if somebody is raped, you shouldn't say if they should or should not be able to get an abortion?
Well, I don't think that's my role as a state legislator to, get involved in the federal laws anyway. I mean,
Well, state laws.
I'm personally
say that,
pro-life.
Parental.
Right.
Parental consent. The state legislature has been involved.
Yeah, I think parental consent is good. Yeah, I'm a gun owner. I'm a member of the NRA. So pro Second Amendment. What other social issues are? This is a big two that get talked about a lot.
Do you see any changes, tweaking for the concealed carry?
Yeah, I have a couple bills that would expand concealed carry. One of them is for corrections officers, and one of them is for hunters. So if you're bow hunting, you're able to carry concealed carry while you're bow hunting. I think there are some other common sense changes to that law that could be helpful as well.
What would be the change for correction officers? I'm sorry, I'm not familiar with that bill.
So it allows them to carry off duty.
And they're not now. As far as, you've got Christopher Hicks, who basically says strong words for various things and hasn't raised much money, et cetera, and Mr. Scobie has an ad running. He talks a lot about his experience, 42 years as a teacher, I guess. Or
Right.
Talks about age and life experience. He did that when he was here. Says, who can best represent struggling families. I have experience. My opponent does not, so he kind of directly comes at you in his own voice.
Right.
Oddly.
Yes.
Your thoughts about that? You are 23.
Yes.
You are on leave from law school. Is that right?
Correct.
Is that a fair argument for the former teacher coach to say that his life experience would better help people than what you're doing in the legislature?
I think it's not a secret that I'm young. Don't try to hide that at all. I also think that we've sent a lot of people with experience to Springfield, and we see what we've gotten from it. I think that my age can be not only something that people will ultimately criticize, but I think that it can be used as such a strength. One, because I don't come with any preconceived notions of how we need to do government, but I just come with an outsider's perspective of here's how government's impacted me. My school closed. Here's how government's impacted me. A lot of people in my generation can't find a job. A lot of people in my generation it might be less expensive for them to get a higher education outside of Illinois, and they're not coming back after that happens. And a lot of people in my generation are starting their family. They're buying a house for the first time. They're deciding if they want to plant their roots in Illinois, and I think that's a huge responsibility for us, is to make sure that Illinois is a place where people want to do that. Also, I don't look or act, I guess, like the typical legislator. People come to me to get my perspective because I look a little different than most of the people in the state house, and that can also be used as a strength for the 95th district, because then I get to talk about the issues that are important to us, or about stories that I've heard in Taylorville or Hillsborough or Carlinville, and then we get to get on the map a little bit more, and that's something that I've been proud to use as a spotlight to say, hey, here's what's happening in the 95th.
What would you identify as the most critical issue in the 95th district right now?
So I think the most critical local issue that we're facing, that I've heard from a lot of law enforcement and I've heard from a lot of families, it's kind of unique, I guess, to the 95th district, is the widespread bath salt epidemic. So it's a synthetic drug issue. And clearly, I mean, they're facing the same challenges that the rest of the state's facing, whether it's education funding or if it's high property taxes. Those are all there. But this is something specific that we're working on legislatively to create a ban on these bath salts overall. It's something that comes in, if there's high like meth use, this comes in after. It's technically legal, so we're working on with law enforcement. There are a lot of churches who are involved in this. There are community groups. It's highly addictive. It really destroys people's lives. So that's really a local issue that we can impact at the state level and help a lot of people, hopefully, in return.
Where are the other drug issues in your district?
So I think it's an epidemic right now, but bath salts is really the local issue that's really difficult.
There's some movement for tax purposes,
Mhm.
or just general society, or prison purposes, to move forward with marijuana legalization or more use in medical. Clearly, the governor has kind of put a hold on it during the pilot program, but what's your thoughts on that?
I voted no against any expansion, I think, until we see what the pilot program does. So I think we have to be really careful about it and make sure that we're putting the right infrastructure in and make sure we're setting up safety precautions for the medical use. There's both a distributor and a grower that have been approved for my district. There have been some hangups in Litchfield. So it is a job creator, but I think we have to face it with a really kind of skeptical look.
Did you get a chance to tour the facility here?
I haven't yet. Did it open today, I heard? Okay.
Just given, I'm sure under front college age,
Mhm.
one of the big things with 125,000 people not getting back grants to go to college, with various universities laying off people,
Mhm.
threatening to close in Chicago State's case.
Yeah.
Who's most to blame and what can be done about that? Because talk about driving people out of the state. Who would send their kid to college in Illinois right now? And who's to blame for that? Because the legislature passed something, the governor says there's no money for it. Who's at fault in this, and how do you fix that? Or what do you, that seems like it would particularly, you'd have a particular understanding of that problem.
Yeah. I was told that, Avery, if you want to go to college, you're going to figure out how to pay for it. And I said, okay. And I figured out how to pay for it. And I had probably 35 college students in my office this week talking about MAP grant funding. And this is a huge issue because a lot of these students are having to pay for their college on their own. And so we talked about the state's financial situation. And I said, for you, it's good that we don't make you an empty promise and say the money's coming and then it doesn't. We presented a budget that was a higher ed budget across the board, community colleges, higher ed, and MAP grant funding that was level MAP grant funding, and asked the speaker to negotiate it. And he said he had no appetite for negotiations. He was moving forward with a piecemeal, just MAP funding approach, and that's where we were going with it. So I lay the blame at the feet of Speaker Madigan, who wasn't willing to sit down and have a robust discussion about how we fund higher education. That was an offer that was given, and he decided to do it his way or the highway, and I think
Just within recently.
just recently,
Okay.
correct.
I mean, the governor proposed like a 30% cut to colleges, and in his budget, it's 25% from the previous year,
Mhm.
not on top of the 30. Is that appropriate? Is that good for our colleges and universities? Do you agree with that level?
I think both are a starting point, and we have to understand that with this situation, the financial situation in Illinois, it's not the case that we can continue with level funding and everything and act like it'll be okay. We have to take a hard look at how we can find cost savings. I know the University of Illinois came to us and said, we're willing to take some cuts. We want to be creative with it, work with us. That was just recently. And so I think that that's a good approach. Empower each group to say, here's where we're willing to find some cost savings. Here's how we're willing to work with the government, with the state, to make these cost savings a reality. The hospitals did the same thing with the 2015 fix. They found some creative ways. I think every agency, everybody who relies on state funding probably has that capability to know internally where they can make the best cuts or make the best flexible arrangements. And so my hope is that we can work with the University of Illinois and other public universities can jump onto that as well, and we can work together with them.
There's a little bit of difference though between the size and scope and background wealth of the U of I and say Eastern.
Right.
And just their ability to dig in and find something else, and especially when Western's already talking about 30 people losing their jobs in March.
Mm-hmm.
Are those the kind of fixes you're talking about?
I don't think that people losing their jobs is ever the first place to look. But I have family members who've graduated or are currently at Western and Eastern, both, and I think that higher education, well, when my predecessor first started campaigning, he said, we're exporting college graduates. Now I think we're not even creating as many. So I think that we have to look at making sure that we have high quality public universities, but nobody gets to say, I'm out, I don't need to take part in making these changes.
30%, like a pretty severe cut compared to anything else going on in the government. I mean, it seems like the governor didn't even mention higher education in his budget address.
Well, I was going through briefly what I saw in the budget book, and I think someone's taking like an 80% cut. I don't remember exactly what it was. So it's not as severe a cut as that would be. I mean, we're going to have to take a hard look at everything across the board.
So we only
Go ahead.
have about 10 minutes left,
Mhm.
so I wanted to
Sure.
make sure we doubled back to, you talked early on about small rural schools
Mhm.
and the issues they face. Can you talk a bit about the debate over the school funding formula?
Sure.
And where you come down on that, specifically Andy Menard's bill?
Sure.
And what you see as its strengths or weaknesses and whether it's something you could support?
Sure. I think what we need to recognize first off is that students Senator Menar and I share a district. And so students in our district do not receive the same amount of money for their education that students in other parts of the state do. We're talking about, half or less than half. So I think that we have to make sure that every student, regardless of where they go to school, are given the same opportunities. Where one school is cutting art, band, they're cutting down to the bare minimum. Other schools are implementing, these robust programs, and that's fantastic. And they should be the standard for what we want to jump to. I'm looking forward to seeing. I hear Senator Menar has a new bill in the works, kind of the third reworking, because we have to be able to find consensus on this issue. But I absolutely think that our school funding formula is out of date. It was out of date in 2006 when my school closed. And that was only 10 years into the current funding formula. And now we're 20 years into the current funding formula, and we still haven't changed it. So I think that's a discussion we need to have. I was proud. There was the Education Funding Task Force that was put together by Speaker Madigan, and we met just last week. And there weren't any downstate Republicans on it. And I asked, can I get on it? Or if you think that it needs to be someone in leadership, someone needs to be on this and be able to speak up for downstate schools. And it's been an honor to be named to that, and I look forward to being a voice for the small rural downstate schools that I think sometimes get overlooked.
Do you think that districts have to be held harmless in any, as the governor says, nobody should lose money if we redo the formula, because Menar says that can't happen?
I think it can. It would be expensive, but we have to make sure that there's consensus. Just sitting in on the first task force meeting, it was all of the Collar County schools talking about how much money they would lose. And when we were talking about winners and losers, it's going to be hard to get people to vote on one side or the other.
That's
So,
where they spend $25,000 to $30,000 per student
right.
versus in your territory. at
But
like
it's mainly
8.
it's mainly property tax revenue, and so asking them to spend more, when they're having it locally, but we don't have the same property tax values in small districts that they do there. And so I think you have to be able to look at the diversity in the state and say, we need to build consensus here, whether it's a hold harmless or some other way of making sure that everybody can get on board, because it should be a nonpartisan issue to be able to fund schools and fund kids and make sure that we're doing the right thing by them.
So I want to mention, you've said twice now that my school closed,
Sure.
and I can understand that, but can you explain your understanding of why Di Vernon and Auburn consolidate?
Yes. So my dad was on the school board for a long time, so I kind of got to see the other side of it. But it was a combination of things. It was special education funding. It was the fact that really the town was really small to afford a school, but it was also school funding formula in the mix. So it was kind of a perfect storm of proration and special education funding and transportation funding and kind of some of the things the community was going through as well.
Declining population.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And I think they're in a good spot right on the interstate, but there were, certain factors that really contributed to that. And then there were factors with other schools not wanting to consolidate. That's always a tough issue to get schools to consolidate one way or another. And so it ended up in an annexation that I think maybe hurt a little more because it's always hard to kill a mascot and send people
This
to
was
the
back
town
around
over.
nine.
Yes,
What was the mascot?
the Dragons.
Gone?
Gone.
Just gone?
Hillsborough has them though. So
Deacon has the dragons.
yeah.
You have a pretty good amount of farming constituents.
Yeah.
How are your constituents with the farming industry being impacted right now, and what would you offer up as solutions for them?
A lot of the issues that I'm hearing with my agriculture advisory board, which is members of the ag community, whether it's agribusiness or farmers, they have some transportation concerns with infrastructure, roads, bridges, getting around, whether it's township roads, county roads. So that's a concern that comes up quite frequently. They also have other concerns with commodity prices and things that kind of out of our hands, a strong dollar. And so a lot of issues come up that are federal issues when we talk about it, but I would say infrastructure is the number one.
Would you
Concern.
support a gas tax hike to pay for an infrastructure program?
I think that shouldn't be our first option. Gas prices are low, but I think that we have money for a capital bill, or we could have money for a capital bill without that.
From
what?
Well, I know that the governor's talked about bonding and other ways to invest in our infrastructure.
But you have to pay the bonds off or
Right.
something.
I don't think that that's the first thing we need to do is raise the gas tax.
But there's no alternative immediately available.
Well, I think that it's a part of a broader discussion on how do we do a capital bill and what do we include in that.
Which means you're not talking
And
about
we
specific
well, and we
actions.
have to make sure that we're sending money to local governments so that they can have their, salt and the other things that they could put on hold this past year.
So you wouldn't favor the reduction in the LGDF to local governments?
No.
That's part of the problem.
Yes.
What about consolidation in general? When you have a school district that's consolidated, we've got 7,000 units of government. Everybody thinks it's terrible, but I've also watched over the years, like one school district might merge in every 30 years. Can anything massive be done? Should townships go away? Because I'm sure you hear from the township officials in your territory. So, the governor and others have this grand plan, let's reduce. Can it be done? And are you for it? And which governments?
I've talked to township officials who say, I think it could make sense if you let me decide which one to maybe merge with so we can have one township shed instead of two in this area that's pretty rural. I'm in agreement with a lot of them that there needs to be a differential in how we treat maybe urban or suburban townships compared to, I have townships that don't have a town in them. And so that's their polling place. That's where they take care of their roads. And so I think there are major geographic differences. I think any kind of blanket government consolidation not only wouldn't be met with a lot of favorability, but I think would be difficult to implement.
Is there a role for the state though at some point to say this is the way it's going to be because, no one wants to consolidate themselves out of existence?
I think going through it personally, I saw how it, pits neighbor against neighbor, and it's difficult, but at the end of the day, I think it's best kept up to the local decision because they know which township they want to consolidate with, or they know what dynamics work, and so I think keeping it local is is smart, and I think it's better.
You don't have Springfield in your district, do you?
No.
Yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Really quickly, because we're almost out of time, what are you hearing from business people in your district in terms of what they see as the primary factors inhibiting growth?
The number one thing I hear from business owners is workers' compensation reform, actually. I've heard from everywhere, from landscapers to people who are running construction companies. They're talking about workers' compensation costs and the fact that if they move to a different state, it would be so much less expensive for them to do business.
How do we compare with workers' comp as compared to other states?
So I think it depends on which study you look at, but specifically the one that I spoke to in Taylorville, it would be a third the cost if you went to Indiana.
What kind of business is that?
Landscaping.
We knew that was coming.
All right, is there any final point that you'd like to make that we didn't cover during today's interview?
I really appreciate the time and the questions. A lot of times I think we talk in generalities or in percentages, numbers, but I think that it's good to remember that this is everyday people that it's affecting. Been doing a lot of pancake breakfasts, actually, going out and meeting people. And last week in Pana, the Rose city of roses, where there isn't a single greenhouse left. I mean, they used to be the booming business town, and I was sitting down eating with Randy, and he was saying that he was on the school board for years. He was telling me about the challenges with schools, and then it leapt into how his son-in-law and his son-in-law drives to Kentucky to go to a job because that's the closest place he can find the work he's qualified for. He's talking about whether or not his 4 granddaughters sitting there, if she's going to be able to go to college in Illinois. And I was sitting there the whole time thinking, this is exactly why we have to make a change now. This is the story, because this is happening in every town, this is happening in every corner, and we need to make sure that we're looking out for Illinoisans in 30 years, not just kind of managing crisis to crisis. And so not only helps me to keep a bigger picture, but that's exactly why I've decided to run again, is because I think we need to make big changes now. So appreciate the time.